much for being here. And we gave a very quick run through of the economic environment. But one thing that is for sure is that Malaysia will be stuck in the global economic environment. We see some headwinds, we see some softness this year in the electronics cycle. What are the opportunities for Malaysia there? What are the downsides?
Thank you, Sumana, Tan Sri Zam, Dato' Khairul Saleh, Dato' Mus, friends. A very good afternoon to all of you. I think broadly there are three important trends that is happening in the region, and Malaysia is particularly integrated into these three major trends that are happening. First, we are seeing reindustrialization in Malaysia. We're seeing reindustrialization because for an extended period of time since China joined the WTO in 2001, we have experienced premature deindustrialization. So for an extended period since 2001, there hasn't been that much of investment into manufacturing compared to what has gone into China. But now that has diverted to Southeast Asia, and Malaysia occupies an indispensable middle in Southeast Asia. We are not as sophisticated as Singapore, but we are a more complex economy, a more sophisticated economy compared to, say, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. The second trend is green transition. Green transition will see a lot more investment into green transition, and that will be an engine of growth for Malaysia if we have the right set of policies and if we really drive that to happen. So green transition is also another engine of growth. The third one will be what I call tech up. Malaysia has been playing at the low cost, low end, low productivity, low wage realm for too long. There are many technologies that are available, which is not very costly and increasingly available to everyone, including AI. So what I call tech up means, I would like it to mean automation, digitalization, the adoptions of technologies across the board, innovation, and perhaps AI. So these three major areas will be sites for investment and also potential engine of growth.
And you talked about premature deindustrialization, the green transition, and innovation through tech. And certainly the plans that the government has put forth, Madani, the NETR, those types of plans all point in the right direction. But to what extent do you think Malaysia is hamstrung by the global external environments, say by the weakness of the ringgit? And does that present any opportunities?
Well, first of all, as far as ringgit is concerned, as far as manufacturing investment into manufacturing is concerned, cheaper ringgit may not necessarily be a negative factor. It may be a positive factor when it comes to investing into manufacturing. Maybe it can be problematic for others, especially when it comes to consumer goods that we import from overseas. But let us look into the future, perhaps not necessarily focusing on 1 or 2 years, but looking into, say, a decade's time. What is clearly going to shape the decade to come is the geopolitical tension between US and China. That is not going to go away. And the other larger trend that is shaping what we are seeing is that the world is transiting away from the idea of economic efficiency to the idea of economic security, the idea that you need to de-risk to a certain extent. And Malaysia and Southeast Asia is well positioned. So I would think that much as there are certain problems which are global problems, it may not necessarily be a problem for Southeast Asia, especially geopolitical tension. As long as geopolitical tension doesn't lead to a war, doesn't lead to a conflict, we may be lucky that we benefit from the shift away from China.
And this, as you rightly pointed out, geopolitical tensions are here to stay. We'll just have to operate in that environment. How well is ASEAN placed to benefit from some of this? Some of the things like the Inflation Reduction Act are pulling back production into the US. And we have copycat acts from the EU. How does Malaysia and ASEAN fit into this new type of supply chain?
Very interesting questions. I was in Detroit attending the APEC as well as in IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Ministerial meeting on behalf of Tunku Zafro in May. And I had the opportunity to engage the US officials. First of all, most of my colleagues from ASEAN were hoping that there will be some form of market access FTA from the US. But I kind of accept that moving forward, whether this administration or the next administration, it is quite difficult to ask the US administration to go back to the idea of market access and FTA. Reason is that because to win or to lose in US, especially the presidency, depending on whether one can win the working class in, say, 6 to 8 states. Therefore, the Biden administration stressed on sustaining the US middle class by ensuring that workers get a better deal. So I went there and said I recognize this fact. And I recognize that it is important that US can sustain a middle class in the United States. The only catch is that we have to square the circle. I also want to build a middle class here. I also want to build a middle class in Malaysia. And having a strong middle class in Malaysia and having a strong middle class in Southeast Asia is good for the United States, is good for everyone. Because if we continue to look at Southeast Asia just as a chip production site, it doesn't necessarily help anyone. But if we look at Southeast Asia as a potential growth center with diversion from China, with a lot more investment coming into the region, we should try to envisage that Southeast Asia will become the next site for middle class. Therefore, Southeast Asia is both a production site and also a potential market for US, European firms, as well as Southeast Asian firms, and of course Chinese firms. So that, I think, is the larger context that I'm trying to get at. Within ASEAN, this diversion that come into ASEAN, we have not seen that sort of influx or that sort of flow for more than 15, 20 years. The flow that comes in is huge, and none of the ASEAN countries can individually, single-handedly chew everything. It is time for regional integration. It is time for closer ties among ASEAN countries. And it is time for us to somehow go back into history to to bring back some of the older ideas such as the flying geese model. To acknowledge that there's some form of vertical integration within the region, accepting that for the next 5, 10, 15 years, Singapore may be at the top in terms of sophistication, in terms of complexity, but Malaysia occupies an indispensable middle, and you have other more labor-intensive economy with demographic dividend being part of the integration. Now, if we come with that mindset, we will see that between Malaysia and Singapore, we have more in common. We can integrate more. Between Malaysia and Indonesia, or as far as semiconductor is concerned, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam has a lot more in common than in competition.
And so that's a good seg to ask you, which industries do you think will benefit in ASEAN? And then also, I think specifically in Malaysia, from this ability to vertically integrate?
I would say there are 3 major industries. Say, for example, when we talk to the US, as far as IPEF is concerned, we know that there are 3 major industries that the US, as well as regional partners, are interested in some form of integration. Number 1 is, of course, semiconductor. and anything that has something to do with semiconductors. Number 2 is clean energy, and number 3 perhaps will be critical minerals. I think these are areas where the US can consider to a certain extent at some point extending their industrial policy to at least companies, US companies that are investing in the region. And for the region, I think we will also, these are the areas that we should also find ways to build consensus, build common platform, and eventually build integration, at least in these sectors.
And let's turn a little bit to China, because the slowdown in China is impacting not only us in the region but everywhere in the world. What does changing economic situations and changing consumer demand in China mean?
I would say that China increasingly is going to be a two-speed economy. Construction has been constituting around 30% of GDP, or construction-related activities in China. I think that anything that has to do with construction in China, we will have to be very doubtful that it will come back massively in the next 5-10 years. Because whatever that was built over the last 5, 10, 15 years, especially since 2008. So what happened was in 2008, what we remember was global financial crisis. But what happened in China that averted a crisis was Wen Jiabao's 4 trillion yuan stimulus package. But what that stimulus package brought was excess capacity in steel, cement, and many other construction materials, and as well as the capability and capacity for construction. And that went on and on and on. Moving forward, I would say that anything that has something to do with construction in China, including, for example, export of steel back into China, will be very problematic for quite an extended period that is foreseeable. But anything else, given the size of the consumer market, given the size of Chinese middle class, and given the size of adoptions of technology, I would still think that any other sectors, particularly things that have something to do with consumer goods, will still be doing very well in China, and it's still growing very well. So we will probably have to see Chinese economy as one that is increasingly two-speed and two distinctively different categories.
Yeah, and that's one of their policies as well, this dual circulation economy that is quite difficult to achieve from their standpoint.
Yeah, but they will have to deal with the construction bubble. I mean, put it in China will have to deal with the construction bubble, they will have to taper off, they will have to deal with that, and that is something that will take years to deal with. But everything else, I still think that everything else is still quite a vibrant economy.
Yeah. And as we get more integrated in Southeast Asia, let's say there's a good case scenario, right, for semiconductor industry, and we pair up according to our comparative advantages. Do you see China then, in the context of this US-China rivalry and the semiconductors and the CHIPS Act, trying to trade off, its market access with leaning on production capacity in Southeast Asia?
Trade off in what way?
As in, it's able to offer market access on the condition that some of the trade rules or circumventing some of the CHIPS Act for that.
We are seeing a lot of movement, but we haven't seen exactly how this will happen. There are a lot of inquiries to come to Malaysia. There are a lot of new investment or inquiries to set up shops in Malaysia, and there are also many proposals that I have come across. I'm sure that the banks know more than me, of trying to form alliances and corporations between Chinese firms and Malaysian firms. How far this will go, how far this will translate into, say, some form of Malaysian products with with some Chinese investment and eventually exporting back to China, I'm not very sure. Also, I am a bit cautious in the sense that what we have exported to China, quite a lot actually end up as consumer goods that is exported to Europe and United States. So whatever that we have been, China is our largest trading partner for the last 14 years. However, a lot of what we have been exporting to China doesn't end up being sold in China. So for instance, the famous iPhone, only about 20% iPhone is actually sold in China. 20% of those produced by Foxconn in China is actually sold in China. The rest was meant to export overseas. So this, well, first of all, it's difficult to decouple and it's almost impossible to decouple. But the point is that in terms of understanding of trade and how it goes, we are still at early stage to see the emergence of new patterns.
Thank you, Sumana. Patrick Tay from PwC. YB Liu, question to you in your capacity as the Deputy Minister, but also as the MP for Iskandar Puteri. You mentioned about integration, especially with Singapore. So the Johor Special Economic Zone concept was discussed recently, etc. Maybe could you elaborate a little bit more about how you see the potential integration and the benefits that can come out of it? Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. Before all this disruption, for the longest of time, Singapore positioned itself as the global city and the financial center for the region. And that was during the same period of time, most of the manufacturing activities actually happened in China. And because of containerization, we moved boxes from one end to the other end of the world. The ethos of the time, that period of time, was just in time. But I think now the buzzword is just in case. And because of that, corporations which set up shops in Singapore would want to see their factories, would want to see their production site. And that resulting in a more collaborative relationship between, say, MIDA and EDB. There are companies which has a headquarters in Singapore and set up their factory in Iskandar Puteri or Sedena or Senai. And that relationship has been going on over the last few years. And between the two governments, between the two investment promotion agencies, has been quite collaborative. But can we take this to the next step? I think taking it to the next step, the incentive for Singapore is that they have a housing crisis. We have a housing glut. That itself works for both sides. But can we actually build more linkages where mobility will be a lot more smoother? Mobility is still a concern. Every morning, 50,000 Malaysians are on motorbike going to Singapore to work at 2,000 Sing dollar. And they are stuck in the jam in the morning, they are stuck in the jam when they come back. Whether mobility can be improved with RTS and maybe even more links will really depends on whether the two governments can work out a deal, maybe even to put up some ferries. I've written an article called seeing Johor Bahru as the second metropolitan. Whether we can, say for example, put up a ferry from Pasir Gudang to Changi, from Puteri Harbour to Tuas, and then maybe Forest City to also a ferry as well. Whether those things will happen and how soon really depends on the political will of the two countries. And I really can't tell how fast we can go. But the understanding now that when in our engagement with Singapore, in Prime Minister's multiple visits to Singapore and meetings in the course of this year, it is very clear that both sides want closer collaboration, because both sides sees that it will benefit both sides mutually. But yeah, how fast, how soon, really depends on political will.
Thank you. Great.
Can I just come back to this questions about urban just briefly? Malaysia is quite a strange place where transport constitute the largest proportion of emission. 37% of emission actually comes from transport. In many other countries, industry, energy generations will be the main segment that main contributors to emission. Ours is transport, and ours to a large extent is because of our dependence on cheap oil, our dependence on single driver cars, and our sprawling of our cities to everywhere.
Thank you. Other questions? We have one over there.
Hi, Ranita from Maybank. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
I've got one question. The recently launched METR policy says that we're going to have a very high reliance on renewable energy. So as you know, we do need battery storage to actually develop in order to fully realize this. So perhaps can YB share these plans in terms of how we're going to encourage the ecosystem to be here in Malaysia, and who do you see as the biggest challenge in terms of investments within the space?
Surely, I mean, we should encourage more, and we will encourage more battery storage and also production of battery storage. I just want to come back to what they call the PV boards and solar panels. We are sometimes we are number one, sometimes we are number two largest producer of PV board or solar panels in the world. But we sell it to Europe, we sell it to US. And First Solar told me that they have lined up the order for 3 years because of Biden's incentive. We also have the longest sunlight for solar panel compared to most countries. Yet, let's not go to battery storage. Even solar panel, we have not done enough. Even putting rooftop, we have just done very, very minimally. I think, yes, we should do more for battery storage. We should encourage R&D. We should encourage a lot more investment into that space. But we should really push the rollout of solar rooftop solar, which is not difficult and which is quite proven already, and we should do it massively now. I was in Batu Pahat on Saturday, and I got an invitation which I was a bit surprised, because I'm working with Sabah and I know the figures. The entire Sabah has around 1,200 megawatt. This factory is telling us that they are going to get the Malaysia Book of Record, what they call citation, in October, and they are inviting Minister Nick Nazmi, and they extend their invitation to me to witness this. On their single factory, on their rooftop, they are going to generate 30 megawatt. They invested more than 100 million ringgit, but to my surprise, they say actually it doesn't take a long time to get your return. And that process, well, I don't want to be too specific, but it doesn't take many years to get the returns. And now with the higher electricity price, they get the returns even faster. So there are a lot of opportunities in which I think, as long as we put our head together and push green transition, maybe with some incentive, if we hasten the pace, a lot of opportunity are there, and it can happen quite quickly.
Excellent. One more question over there. And do we have any other questions in the room? Just raise your hand.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Just to follow up the solar panels, because I'm a site director Wong from Restaurant Graphite. We have a factory in Banting. In fact, 3 years ago, before the COVID, we had done a study that we calculate our roof able to install 5 megawatt. But unfortunately, the policy of the energy are limited me to invest up to 5 megawatt. And that's kind of conflict that we, as industry player, that we face.
I hope NETR has somehow solved your problem, or at least reduced the challenge.
From 1 mega to 2.7.
Okay, let's push more.
All right, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to pull the moderator's privilege and ask you the last question, which is that, I mentioned before that policy direction seems to be correct, right? When you look at the different plans, NETR, Madani, all of those things, but at the same time, politics has been quite unstable, and so plans have changed from a business environment standpoint. When we are looking at it from the Economist, that's always a risk, right? Continuity is what we want. What do you think could change that, where there's continuity of policy planning?
So you want me to explain about politics, right? That got everyone excited. Actually, I have friends in Singapore who ask me, why is everyone talking about Malaysia not being stable, but and rush to Indonesia to invest when there's a presidential election coming up? I couldn't find an answer, but I think maybe because half of those who are working in the financial sector in Singapore are Malaysians. They know Malaysia too well. With the end of the state elections and also the by-elections in Johor, I would say that the contour and the structure of Malaysian politics is probably quite clear now. We will have to accept that the 4 northern states will be dominated by PAS. The rest of the peninsula is unlikely to go their way because of its multi-ethnic composition. And say, for example, in the southern states, Barisan Nasional can hold on to half of Malay votes. What may happen is the diminishing appeal of Perikatan Nasional and the diminished influence of Bersatu. So I make a distinction between PAS and Bersatu because PAS will be entrenched in the 4 states. And PAS, when it is entrenched in the 4 states, it may want to take a much longer view by getting the federal government to some form of deal so that they can govern their 4 states without much disturbance from the federal and maybe with a bit of help from the federal. So I think moving forward, PAS probably will ignore Bersatu, and the idea of Perikatan as a potential challenger to federal power will diminish. We will have, and whoever runs a federal government, if say for example Dato' Sri Anwar for the next 10 years, if he's able to continue to win the other states in Peninsula, plus Sabah, plus Sarawak, and manage that coalition well, he will be able to stabilize the politics for an extended period of time. Of course, economics comes into play. The median wage in 2021 was 2,250 ringgit. That means 50% of salarized Malaysians are earning less than 2,250. And there is a sizable number of Malaysians who decided that they are going to work in Singapore, and the other huge group decided that it's not worthy to work in any formal employment. They become food panda driver, they become Grab drivers. Everyone or many of them are living in a precarious situation. And mind you, 80% of Malaysians who are salarized are earning less than 5,500 ringgit. So many Malaysians are living in quite a precarious situation financially and economically. And this government will have to ensure that this is addressed. If this is not addressed, if we cannot, over the period of say 5-10 years, create a much stronger middle class, then we will face very serious pushback.
Thank you very much. Some very insightful and candid comments, so very appreciative of that. Please join me in thanking Yang Mohammed for his time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.